Hey, hello, and hi. It is Tree once again, but for something a little bit different. It's all good that I've been ranting on and raving on about the problems that servers have, but if I have not provided proper constructive criticism, then I've sort of failed what I set out for this series to do, with Tree Reviews Badscapes I'm talking about, of course, and that's to improve the scene as a whole. So what I thought I'll do is give sort of like a top list of things that developers can do to bring more people in and to release something that's of better quality. Just a small side note, I'd also like to thank everyone who has been viewing and commenting in the threads. It's the main way that I'm getting views. So if you guys feel comfortable, feel free to post it anywhere else that you see fit. I mean, it's not required, but it would be appreciated. I'm going to kick it straight off. And this is number one. I cannot stress more the importance of a decent advertisement thread. And when I say advertisement thread, I of course refer to the thread that you first post when you're starting a server out on the Mobiscape advertisement boards. And in fact, this stands for any boards that you choose to advertise your server on. Because I know you will do it. I know you will spam your link around and spam your client around different forums. Because there are a few forums out there now. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm saying that when you do this, you should properly represent the features that you're actually providing. You need to set yourself apart from every other server out there. Otherwise, they're going to take one look and they're not going to bother. And if they don't bother to actually download the client, they're not going to bother to play. Well, they can't play. And they're not going to, play for an extended amount of time. I cannot tell you how many servers fail to do this and they do not launch at all. Like their player base remains a consistent maybe 13. There are a few lone soldiers that are checking it out, but it doesn't grow from there. You really do need an active player base. And once you have an active player base, it just builds on top of itself. It just keeps going. It builds and builds and builds and builds before you have a really lively, active community. It's very important. And you're probably going, Tree, how do I make my thread super good? How do I get all these eyeballs on them? How do I make people really want to play what I'm dishing out? Well, firstly, you do not want big photos of donation stores and the benefits they provide. No one wants to play a server where they feel unfairly disadvantaged. And this is so important to remember because there are so many other people who are producing these servers, not producing them, hosting these servers, and these players can go to any of them at all. There's literally no reason for them to go to your server if you're providing an unfair disadvantage. So that stands for itself. You also want a lot of media on the actual thread. So this includes pictures of you actually doing something that's not just the standard. If I see a player just hitting a tree over and over again, that's not going to draw me in. But if I see a really well done custom area, I will 100% be drawn in. If I see a video, even better. If I see a video with some nice music and quality editing and all that, a promotional video, then I will be inclined to download that client. It's just natural. If I have one thread open of just boring text and then I have another thread with really well done with Photoshop graphics, I am of course going to pick the shiny one. That's just human nature. We like shiny things. You also want to make sure that even though you do give a bit of history, don't make it so long and boring, because usually when I read a advertisement thread, I check out the first two sentences, maybe scroll through a few photos, and then I'll read the rest if I deem it interesting. If you don't have me hooked at the start, you're certainly not going to get me to read the whole thing, because a lot of the time you guys just keep going and going with useless shit that no one really cares about. And that brings me to the features list. Okay, you don't need to list every skill that's working individually. There's no need. All you need to do is say that all the baseline skills are working as one point and then go on to list the working custom features. And I must say that a donation shop is not a feature. I don't care how you work around that. It is not a feature and it gives off a bad impression. It gives off a pay to win element, just like you see the mobile phone apps where you see in-app purchases. It does push you away from it. So just note that. But I cannot stress more the importance of a decent advertisement thread, because when you're starting off, this is your main source of traffic. It's that thread. You can't afford the ads. You can't afford to be on the top server list. You're spamming your shit out there and you're hoping someone picks up. So do not give them the worst first impression ever, because it will be your downfall before you even get a chance to rise. Custom content. Custom content is very finicky because it's very easy to do wrong and it's very hard to do right. But when it's right, it is a home run. And I'm telling you now that if you have decent custom content, you will draw in the crowds. They will run and they will flock and they will tell their friends, and you will get some good traffic. You'll get some nice eyeballs on that screen. But, you'll probably have noticed that a lot of my reviews have been pretty negative about the custom content, and of course that's because it has been done wrong. So if you want to see some really, really good examples of custom content done wrong, check out my other videos. But I'll pretty much just say that when you're adding custom content, you need to be wary of the player base. You need to take into consideration, how is this going to affect their experience? Is it going to screw up player progression? Is it not going to align with the leveling rates that I've implemented? Is it going to provide certain players an unfair advantage over another? I understand the need for shops, because when you have a small player base, you want them to be in one central location, because you don't want them distributed throughout the lands, because you want them to be close. Otherwise, you'll never see anyone. No community will ever form, and people will think that you're running a ghost town. That's not what you want. And I also understand that certain rares don't drop if you don't have the population for it. I mean, you're never going to have like a dragon item drop if there's only like 13 people playing at that time. So that's okay, but just make these things really hard to attain. The best advice I can give you is, instead of adding and just throwing in custom NPCs, is to instead expand the land. And what I mean by that is maybe adding a new village with a whole bunch of related NPCs, or, revamping new towns with new features. But of course, always keeping the idea that everything must be balanced, everything must be working, and everything must align with the goal of your server. But if you increase the land and you create interesting content, you've gone ahead of what Jagex have actually done, which they went down the troublesome route of improving the UI and adding more skills, when instead they should have actually, kept the lore going in a way that a player can play through it. So if you do that, you're going to nail it pretty much. You're going to be better than every server out there who has failed to done it. It's the beauty of private servers, is that you can add that custom content just like, any other mod supported game. Number 3 is starting items. A lot of the servers you hop on now seem to have a whole bunch of starting items, and only recently have they checked your IP to make sure you don't keep on creating accounts to, increase your wealth, because you're usually given about 15 mil on some servers, some absurd amount like that. And if you keep creating them, you just send them to your main account, and all of a sudden you've got absurd amount of money. It's good that you are checking that the IPs don't match, but there are ways around it. So it's a terrible system, and I think it's also important to remember that 15 mil should never, ever, ever be a starting amount, and giving dragon weapons and dragon items should never be starting items. Think back to Tutorial Island, when you were given a bronze pickaxe and maybe a wooden sword and shield. That's what I consider starting items. They're enough to allow the player to engage in the content that's provided, but also maintains player progression pacing, which, as I've said previously, is so important. It's important because it keeps players interested in the game. It gives them it's the carrot on a stick. It's the goals that they're striving towards. But when you just skip that and give them everything that they need and just go, hey, go wild, it's going to be very short-lived enjoyment, and people aren't going to stick around. So when you actually do implement starting items, just make sure they're really basic things that don't give an advantage if duplicated a few times. So no dragon items, no 15 mil. Just give them a few K maybe, not even that. Give them the starting tools that they need and leave it at that. You don't need anything more than that. Instead, add mechanics. If you want the pacing to be a little bit faster across the board, make sure there's mechanics that allow for it. But just don't throw it at them. Don't throw it at them without them having to work for it, because that is bad design, and that will push people away. Number four is more the technical side. I see a lot of people when they start off their server, they think that they have to have the fanciest of fanciest server plans. Usually they pay some sort of service and they provide the hosting. You don't need something that great. This is the same sort of mentality that people who start off, say, streaming have, and they go out and buy the greatest microphone they can and the best webcam, and they're disappointed that they don't see a return, and their return being, of course, people watching them, but your return's going to be people playing your server, or maybe it's for the money that'll come later on. The thing about donations is that originally they were set up because people couldn't legally pay for something that wasn't belonging to the guy hosting the server. This I remember this happened a lot in the World of Warcraft private servers, and people used to use the word donation because Blizzard, of course, owned the game. So there would be legal troubles if they're getting people to pay for the content. So that's the way they got around it. Here in our community, what we should be doing is instead seeing donations as a way to help people who have contributed a lot to it and have something that's really great, a product that's really polished. It should be a way to support your fellow friend, but at the moment it seems like it's a way to keep the server up and running, or they make it seem like that. If they're having trouble keeping the server up, then they've gone too far and they've overextended. The key is start small, make it scalable, and expand as your member base increases. If you try and do that too fast, you're going to be short on funds and you're going to find yourself starting to implement donation features just to scrap a few dollars together. That's not what you want, and it'll actually drive people away and it'll have the opposite effect of what you intended. You may make a few initial quick bucks, but it's not going to be the long-term money that you actually desire or the long-term views, players that you actually want. And on the same note, you also want to maintain a very polished server. That means that there's going to be a very little bugs there for people to stumble across. You want things that work. You don't want them to see the mistakes there. You want everything on the back end to be nice, neat, maintainable. You want problems to be solved relatively easy when they're reported in, say, a bug thread that you have. You want to be able to quickly expand or decrease or scale. You basically, on the technical side, you want polish, you want good design, you want a way that's easy for you. And if you make it easier on yourself, it will pay off. And last but not least is more of the staff side. A lot of people just give out admin or mod to anyone that they see around the server frequently. This is the wrong approach, and a friend is not equal to a valid staff member. You should actually look at these people and see if they will be responsible and if they are a good fit for the position. You shouldn't just make your friends moderators or staff, because that usually leads to a lot of player abuse, and that will put people off completely. You do not want that bad mark against your name. When you do pick them, give them a probation status for a little bit of time, so you can sort of see how they're going, see how they react to certain situations. Hey, you can even create fake accounts and see how they interact with those fake accounts, but you do need to test them, because the way you want the server set up is that you want them looking after it when you're not there. That's the whole idea. It's to improve the community. You want them to be friendly, active, just present. You want them to help people. And that's something that you really, really do need. I posted a thread a little bit earlier, and it was of staff abuse that was done to me when I was actually reviewing the server, which is terrible luck for them, terrible timing. And he locked me in a jail for a good 10 minutes for doing nothing at all. Actually, no, I pressed a button. I didn't respond to them. Like, say if I was a new player, I wouldn't even know how to respond, so they wouldn't. It's reasonable. It's likely to happen. But the way they reacted was just so over the top, and it really did put me off. And my review reflected that, but I think anyone's experience with that server would be negative because of that. So it's very important to pick who your staff members are. And it's also very important not to say that you're giving these positions out in the thread, because it doesn't make you look very professional at all. That's not what you want. And that about sums it up, guys. I've been talking for a fair while. I've listed off a few good points. These aren't all of the points that make a good server, but it's a nice start, I like to think. If you have those, I think you're doing pretty well. You're at least ahead of every other server that I've seen out there. There are a few exceptions, and I hope to cover them in my coming review videos. I thank you very much for watching. I would appreciate that if you could post in the thread, or just post it anywhere really. I'm desperate. Love me. Yep, this has been Tree. Cheers once again.